first day of 2024. I would like to say new year, new me, but I'm probably going to fall into the same old traps as I have the last 29 years, but I'm working on it. I spent all day yesterday reflecting and journaling and planning for the year ahead, so I'm quietly optimistic that this is going to be the best year yet, but I also know that I struggle with discipline and consistency, so we'll see how that all plays out. Anyways, first story of the year. We're still in that timeline around year 8 to year 9. So just after the soccer dream has started fading away, I started spending a little bit more time outdoors, and a few of my friends were popping up on the scene with cars. And so before you knew it, a lot of weekends we would go down to the coast or we'd go out to the river and have a bit of fun in the bush. So this particular occasion was the first time in my life I can really think of, maybe the last, but definitely the first, that I played a big role in almost letting multiple of my friends drown. So yeah, bit of a wake-up call to say the least. But this takes place probably the summer of year 9. Grew up in Canberra, got pretty used to a lot of interstate people saying how shit Canberra was. And, I always got a bit defensive. Deep down, I kind of knew that it wasn't somewhere that I was going to settle long term. But I always felt like interstate people didn't have a true idea of what Canberra was like, because they come on school trips to the War Memorial, Parliament House, Questacon, go out to Mooseheads and think that they have seen all that Canberra has to offer. And that couldn't be further from the truth. We're fortunate enough to be called the bush capital for a reason, because we're surrounded by a lot of awesome bushland and beautiful rivers, and not far from the mountains and not far from the coast. So there's a reason why they picked Canberra as a capital, because it was strategically positioned between Sydney and Melbourne, and it wasn't by the port, and that would make us more vulnerable to attacks. So they picked somewhere inland. Not the best place in Australia, but far from the worst. And since moving from Canberra, I always find myself defending it, even though it's just a waste of breath, because people aren't going to go out to these beautiful places that I grew up visiting. So maybe I should just let them keep assuming that Canberra's a shithole. Anyways, we'd go down to the Murrumbidgee River and spend a bit of time there in summer. There was a lot of great walks. There was deep water solo climbing. You could go fishing. You could go cliff jumping. And there was barely anyone around. So somewhere that we loved spending a lot of time as kids. And that was passed down from Dad. He used to do the same thing 50 plus years ago as well when he was a youngster. So awesome spot down on the Murrumbidgee. In particular, between Pine Island out in Tuggeranong and Canberra Pools, that stretch of about, 10 to 15 k's of river, you don't get a lot of people down there, and you have some awesome rapids. You actually have some quite dangerous rapids there in high flow. And yeah, you could say that's where we cut our teeth with getting some river awareness about us. So this particular trip, there was probably 7 or 8 of us, all aged between maybe like 14 and 18. A couple of the older boys had the P's, so they drove us out there. We swung by Kmart or Big W on the way, and we all scrounged together what money we had and bought cheap little blow-up boats. And so we got like $20 blow-up boats. I think the friend that I was with, we kind of splurged a little bit more and got $150 blow-up raft. And we were thinking, fire out, we've got the vessel of choice here. This thing's going to be unreal. And within 5 minutes of being on the water, our boat had popped. And it meant that someone had to shift onto an inflatable single-person mattress. So there was now 2 people on a single inflatable mattress. One of them, my long-time good mate, Harry Bink, he had a broken leg at the time and he could barely walk. And thinking about it now, it was not a good idea for him to come on this trip. But in typical Harry fashion, he didn't want to miss out. So He was on the blow-up mattress with my other friend Marcus, and there was a few of us boys there, and without getting into too much detail, we were all a little bit high, if you know what I'm saying. So we'd smoked a bit of weed. It was something that we're only just really getting into, and back in those days, for some reason, when we smoked weed, we'd feel really energetic. Yeah, so in those early days of smoking weed, we would get really energized from it. And so I recall most of us smoking some weed before we set off on a full day rafting journey down the Murrumbidgee. And we were just buzzing. We were so excited. Didn't really know what to expect, but figured, oh yeah, she'll be right. And like I said, within 5 minutes, my boat had popped. So it meant that some adjusting needed to take place, and people were squeezing in 3 people in tiny little 2-person $20 rafts. There was 2 people on a single inflatable mattress, and then there was a couple other teams of 2 in a blow-up raft. And so none of us had ever done anything like this before, where you're in a blow-up boat and you're going down a watercourse. Of course, we'd paddled around in flat water, but not in moving dangerous currents. And we didn't know a whole lot about what was to be expected up ahead. We knew a little bit of the river system, but not the entire stretch. And we kind of figured we'll just make it up as we go. And anyways, that's what we did. We smoked our way down the river. It kind of got increasingly more and more challenging, but it felt well within our capabilities. I remember there being a couple of small waterfalls that were probably only a meter or 2 drop-offs. And we thought, this is perfect. This is exactly what we're after. Good amount of challenge, good amount of adrenaline, but nothing too crazy. Fast forward an hour or 2, another boat's popped, and it's even more chaos. You got people starting to just float down the river instead of paddling. And I remember we were all a bit sidetracked because we just had another smoke of weed, and we were all just off in our own little worlds, not paying too much attention to what was coming up. And I remember being second in line at the front of the group, and there was another boat up in front of us, and they were the 2 boys on the inflatable mattress. And we've got Marcus and Harry, both goers, but obviously Harry had a fucked up leg. Marcus wasn't the best swimmer in the world. All of a sudden, you hear them yelling, signaling that there was a drop-off coming up, and the boys are just panicking, and before you knew it, they were the first one to get sucked over the falls. All of the boats were quite close together, and so before you knew it, the first one was over the falls, and then we were second in line, and my mate and I are going straight towards this waterfall drop-off, not knowing what's over the edge, and it's too late to paddle off to the side, and there was a rock in the middle of the twin falls that were going around, and I decided to paddle straight for that, and it meant that we could grab onto that rock. And I remember grabbing on for dear life. And then my other mate's in the boat, and he's kind of couldn't reach to the rock. And before you knew it, I was up on the rock, and then I'm grabbing onto his arm. He's just distraught, absolutely thinks he's about to go over the falls and die. It was making such a thunderous and scary sound, so I can understand why he was tripping out. And I was trying to pull him up, and I couldn't. The current was just way too strong. And he was crying, he was dead set crying his eyes out. And I couldn't help but piss myself laughing. I just never seen him like this. Even though it was not a time to laugh, I couldn't help it. He was tripping out, and I just was holding on for dear life. And eventually, instead of pulling him up, I kind of pulled him around to the side of the rock where he could get his feet a bit better. And then I could lift him up, and he could climb up at the same time, and he got onto the rock. And then in the meantime, another boat has gone off over the falls. So I think 2 of the 4 boats ended up going over the falls. And I remember standing there and looking over, and it was just a cascade of waterfall after waterfall. None of them massive, but the sustained drop-offs and thunderous, churning water, it did not look like a good place to be. We just didn't hear from the first 4 boys that went down there. We didn't know if they'd got stuck. It looked like there was a lot of rocks that they could potentially get stuck on. And all we've just were worried about was not going over ourselves and doing our best to scoop some people up in the process. So, yeah, my friend and I were stuck on that rock. There was another 2 that had kind of swum off around to the side in their boats. And the two of the boys at the back, they were able to pull up before the waterfall and skirt around to the side and avoid it altogether. And we kind of ended up jumping across and swimming across before getting washed down the waterfall to meet them. And the whole time we're wondering, where are the boys? The last we saw of them is them going over the falls and just hearing Harry scream, hear Marcus scream, what is going on? And the thought of going over those falls fully abled is scary enough, but then to have a freshly broken leg, I was so scared that something bad had happened. We end up portaging around, which is where you carry your boats and you climb around the rocks, and then we see all of the boys down there below, and they were not in good shape. It was the biggest relief once we saw them. We were all thinking that we were going to lose someone, and yeah, full credit to the boys. They, rode out a rapid and a half. Like a couple of the boys had said that they'd been pinned under the water, getting pushed up towards a rock in a little concave area, which is just the perfect way to die, and had sort of managed to skirt around and slip out into the stream and just get churned out and spat out 20-30 meters down underwater. Turns out that particular spot has killed people before. There's an area there that has a rock that has a concave below water, and you've got all this current flowing down, and it's just pushing you into this caved, divoted out bit. Super close call there. Biggest eye-opener. We went from just being in a haze and just having the best day to all of a sudden it's like a life or death scenario. And I can still vividly see my mate's face when I was like holding on to him. He's bawling his eyes out. So we're only a couple meters away from the drop off, and I'm trying to pull him back up, and he's just hysterical. Yeah, I remember when I finally pulled my mate up on the rock, he huddled up in the fetal position like a little baby and just cried on this rock. He was just in another planet. He was so scared. So yeah, we made it through that really difficult part. We sighed a massive breath of relief when we all got reunited. And then we realised, we're only like halfway. We've been out here for 4 or 5 hours. We've made it 5 or 6 Ks down the track, and we've still got another 5 or 6 Ks to go at least. That was a long and painful afternoon. Boats kept dropping off like flies, and before you knew it, most of us were just freestyle swimming or walking along the bank. Really dragged out, and we all sort of slowly separated as a group and all eventually caught back up and rejoined at the end. And we kind of just felt like we'd been in battle together and came out on the other side. And I'd never really experienced anything like that before, and it clearly has had a lasting impression on me because I've pursued meaningful challenges with friends like that ever since. Obviously, moving forward, we were a little bit more calculated at the way in which we research these certain projects before just jumping in the deep end. Like, that's exactly what not to do. Is this story is just go to a river where you know nothing about it, get a $20 blow-up boat, Bob's your uncle, go for gold. That's a really good way to get hurt and, potentially die. And so, yeah, there's a lot of resources these days that you can go online and you can find out bits and pieces about particular rivers and crux sections that you need to worry about, areas that you should portage around. And essentially, what you should do is, once you know you're coming up to a section and you're unsure whether it goes or not, is getting out before portaging around and having a good look at the whole area from up above, from different angles, and assessing, is this something that I'm certain I can make my way through safely enough? And if you're unsure, don't be a hero, just walk around. And we didn't have life jackets, we didn't have helmets, we had nothing. All we were worried about is not getting our weed wet. And so we were the most inexperienced people that have probably ever paddled down that, and we almost lost a life from it. So yeah, another story that I'm not necessarily proud of, because we kind of just went in there guns blazing and someone nearly didn't come back. hence why I want to tell the story. Hopefully other people think twice before they go tackling river systems that they have no idea about, or just any adventure in general. It's like, sure, there's some things out there that you can take your mate's word for it, and if they've been out and they've done a certain climb or they've been to a certain surf break and you trust what they have to say and you trust that they know what you're capable of and vice versa, then you can take your friend's word for it, but always try to take people's suggestions with a grain of salt, because they might have been there when the river was a meter lower, and then consequently it wasn't as strong, wasn't as dangerous. There's new features that might have been there when you were there opposed to when they were there, and there's just so many different variables. So there's no such thing as a silly question. If your friend is giving you advice on a specific adventure, don't feel like a pest just for asking a bunch of silly questions, because the more you can gather about a particular trip, the better, to make informed and safe decisions. So it's like, I've got friends that just recently paddled down the Franklin River after never doing a pack rafting trip in their life, and they just went straight in the deep end. And yeah, they pulled it off and they were fine, but they went about it the right way. They talked to locals, they got the appropriate information, they had the correct gear, they're capable, they're goers, they picked it when the river level was at the right height. You see what I'm saying? You got to make sure that you're ticking all these boxes and not just setting yourself up for a failure.